So we're going to continue with the introduction to React, and you know, I'm a big believer in learn by doing, and so we did have some theory that we covered, but now we're just going to dive into the first lab. This is a code along, so please code along. And I go fast, as you know, so I'm going to say this up front. Please stop me and ask if you fall behind. Okay, you're more than welcome to ask anytime. Connor, yeah.
With how we do beat and everything,
Yep.
for the directory for dot, the Doga folder, how well does that work if the folder we're working in is a subfolder of the folder?
I'm just gonna have it be the root folder. So
We're just gonna have the,
yeah, we'll just do the root folder. So let's go ahead and go to github.com. And we're going to create a new repository. So everyone's going to GitHub, new repository. I'm going to say no template. I don't know if do you guys have the repository template option? No. I'm the owner. I'm just going to call this Veet. I'm going to do all lowercase, Veet _ shopping _ cart. And this is going to be a private repository. And README. I'm going to choose Node for my get ignore. And MIT. The license. Okay, let's go ahead and create this repository. Go ahead and add me as a collaborator. So you're going to go into settings, collaborators, put in your password if you need to, and add people. Evan, EVAN, Gudmestad. It's not finding my own name, but go ahead and add me. Okay, I will accept all these later. Let's kind of take a look a little bit ahead in what we're creating. You know, we're just going to create our first user interface. Of course, it's kind of cool. Shopping cart. You know, e-commerce. If you're going to build a website, my website might as well have some e-commerce. So we learned how to set up kind of a back end. Now we're going to learn how to set up a shopping cart front end. So this is what we're creating. So let's go ahead and clone that repository that we created. And you clone it to your desktop. Just an empty repository. And open that up with code. And let's start here. Now this lab needs to be refactored a little bit because this was using the old create React app. So now this is npm lowercase n create Veet at latest dot. And then you're going to run npm install and then npm run dev. These are the three commands we'll run at the terminal. Starting with npm create Veet at latest space dot means current directory. Now, interesting. Remove existing files and continue. No, I don't want to remove. Oh.
Just remove the dot.
So let's do npm create Veet at latest, remove the dot. Let's try that. Now, it will create a subfolder called Veet Project, which is fine. It's not the end of the world. I just kind of wanted it to be huh. All right. Well, we can make it a subdirectory. I guess it's not the end of the world.
Do you think if we move them out?
I kind of wondered that, you know. So
Mess with it?
if you move them out and then move them back in,
I don't know if it would mess with it at all, or if it would let it.
you know, we
I
could.
feel like it would mess with it.
Let's not. Yeah. Let's just go ahead and say here npm create Veet at latest. Project name. We could just say shopping cart. So I got rid of the dot. Options, or the project name is shopping cart. Framework is React.
So I think I might know the. When you create one, it auto creates a get ignored and a readme. So maybe it's because we already have them in there. Is
Yeah.
what messing with it.
Yeah, you're right. So let's select the framework of React. The variant is just JavaScript.
Oh, interesting.
I'm sure we could find a solution, but that's
Mine let me install it with the package that get ignored stuff.
now we need to CD into shopping cart. CD into shopping cart. Yes, sir.
My npm create is not working.
Okay, let's do that. CD shopping cart. So if it creates the subfolder shopping underscore cart, then you do npm install. Okay, and to run this, npm run dev gives us a templated React app, which is where we wanted to start. Okay, yes.
What would happen if we didn't do the CD shopping cart? You're left on.
So what would happen if you don't do CD shopping cart? Well, it would try and install dependencies in a directory that doesn't have any.
Outside of that folder.
Yeah, it would be in the parent folder. So you go into shopping cart, and there's no node modules until you run the npm install.
Mhm. Okay, that makes sense.
Do that, and then when you go to gender, then change it.
Okay. Let's go into app.jsx, and I'm just going to delete everything in here, including my use state hook, and I don't need our logos. I will use the hook called use state here in a little bit, but let's just get this to say h1 shopping cart. Click on localhost 5173. It says shopping cart.
Beautiful.
maybe, since this is what we're building, you know, the way I would think to build it would be to build it all in one place, and then you could break it down into sub components. But if I look at this, you know, we have a shopping cart list, and then we have list items. And so very basic, you know, component would be shopping cart list, and a list is made up of list items. However, you know, we could start by, you know, putting everything in one place,
As a lane.
and then break it down into smaller components as we go. A conversation we haven't really brought into play yet. You might remember the term hook, but you probably don't remember much about hooks. Hooks are the way that you can set state in React. And so hooks are where you store your data. And so, you know, you have, like, for an example, an array. You might store that array inside of a hook to then display that on the page. And so let's just kind of make a basic hook, and we'll just call this I don't know, username. So kind of demonstrate how this might work. So a hook is this use state hook. Really, we skipped line 1, which is importing the use state hook from React. If you're going to call this function use state, you have to, of course, import it on line 1. We are creating a hook here, which is a user's name. In my case, maybe a username is Evan Gudmstead as such. And then set username is a function to modify your state. And so maybe in a H2 we say by just to display it on the page. Now, what comes inside the quotes here are the default values of your data, right? In this case, we have a string for the username of my username. Now, we're not modifying that yet, okay? But we're just using an example of, okay, here's a hook. Let's create the hook. This is array destructuring, right? So we get out of this use state method, it returns 2 things in an array. The first thing is a username. The second thing is a method to modify that username. So if we kind of boot this up now, we can see my usernames hanging out right here. This is an example of declarative programming, right? Where you just say, I don't know how it's going to be done, but I want the username to go here, right? I don't know what's going on with the DOM, right? I don't know what the ID is. I don't know what the CSS is going to be applied yet. All I know is I'm declaring I want a piece of data to go right here. So this is an example of declarative programming. And so now we need a way to modify the user's name in this variable. Maybe we just do a little button click, right? So I'm going to have a button. And when you click the button, you're going to see that we are going to pass an anonymous arrow function to modify the username, to modify the data that's in our hook to whatever we put in the quotes here, which in this case is Bob Dylan. The button is going to say change name. And notice when I click the button, again, declarative programming, I don't really know what the ID is. I don't really know.
It does the thing.
It does the thing, right? The shadow DOM works with the real DOM to update the page. So that's kind of cool. We now see how that we're going to work with this work with state. Now, kind of going back to our shopping cart, which is what we're ultimately creating, we have one hook for our, what you would call like an item count. Or one piece of data for an item count, which is a sum of everything here. Each item has a text box, right? It allows you to change the item itself, right? But that's a text box. So we need to, instead of, like in this case, we're setting a static username. Maybe we should get that. Maybe we should get that string from a text box instead, right? Let the user type their username instead of statically coding it. Well, so let's go ahead and create a text box, right? So input type of text. And you can see here that the username will also be displayed inside the text box. Now, instead of being an on-click event, which the button was an on-click event, right? As we type on change, every time you change the information in the text box, we generate a JavaScript event. E is the event object, right? And we're going to set the username to the event object's target, which means the control that initiated the event, which is this text box, and the value of that text box. So the event object target property value attribute will be used. And you can see here, not only is it going to change what's in the text box, it'll also change what's in the H2. Right, so this is how now whatever I type in my text box is being stored in that hook. Notice what I'm not doing on change is I'm not modifying the username variable directly. No. So that's another learning curve that I had to step over, that these hooks React hooks are immutable. Immutable is a fun programming word. I'm guessing you've heard it before. It is what it sounds like. Do a Google search for the word immutable. Unable to be changed. So React hooks are immutable. You cannot change username directly. What you can do is you can make a copy of it and then make a change to it that way, but you do not change the variable directly. Okay, so because of this, because React hooks are immutable, the way that we code and change data in our state has to keep that in mind. A lot of times what we do, oftentimes we will make a copy of the data, modify it, and set the state to the copy. Okay, so that's a big learning curve. Okay, that React hooks are immutable, and so what we do is we make a copy. Now here we're not even making a copy. Here we're just getting rid of what used to be username, and we're changing it to whatever the value of the text box is. All right, we're getting rid of the old one and just updating it to whatever is in the text box. Okay, so that's a little bit on the use state hook. There are other what are called hooks. Another very common hook is use effect. The use effect hook is used to load data from an API. So like kind of like on the page load, we'll be using use effect quite a bit. So that's a little bit on hooks that we will need. Now the next thing I kind of want to do is explore this Vite a little bit, because I just started using it myself, and it doesn't look to me like this font right here doesn't look out of the box. It looks like there's some bootstrap going on here. So if I were to inspect this, yeah, this doesn't look. So this font family,
The
it's,
apps.css and index.css are, if you didn't clear those out, that's what those are.
no, I know. I just want to see that there's bootstrap built in. That's kind of what I'm getting at. So let's dig a little deeper, right? So if I go to app CSS, see there's a card. Sounds like a bootstrap card, but I want to dig and find. Let me go into node modules. See if we see any bootstrap in here. Let's look at index.html. Let's see what they're loading here. Notice here, all they have in index.html is a div ID of root. This is kind of what's on the server until that JSX gets transpiled and sent down to the browser. Remember how I said that this is not necessarily the best for SEO, right? Look at this markup. There's nothing here. There's no markup here stored on the server until someone starts using this and it gets sent down, this JSX gets transpiled down to the client. So this is, Google can't crawl this. This is not useful to crawl. But you can kind of see here what's loaded here is this root, and then everything is put into root. Like if you get rid of this div, nothing's going to work. But notice they do load main.jsx. Main.jsx uses that root and renders the app component. This is the app.jsx. This is the the root component. But I'm not seeing any Bootstrap. Now, here's what we can do. We'll just throw in a little class name. Now, remember in HTML we had class. You might remember this is JSX. Class is a reserved word in JavaScript, so we can't use the word class in our HTML attributes. We have to use class name because otherwise, let's do class name of text primary and see if our word shopping cart changes color. No. So I guess there's no Bootstrap built in, which is fine. We can bring in Bootstrap.
I'm pretty sure there's not.
So let's go to getbootstrap.com.
I did figure out if you actually do the npm dependency bootstrap and
Uh-huh.
then you just import the CSS
Mhm.
from the module,
Mhm.
it works that way too.
Mhm.
Instead of
Yeah, so there's really two approaches, and Jacob is speaking to one of the two approaches. Approach one would be to go to the examples, use a CDN. And so if I go to the docs and I look at these CDNs, include Bootstrap, CSS, and JS, and use this CDN to bring in Bootstrap and use this CDN to Bootstrap, sometimes CDNs are not, you put them on like a Google Cloud server, and there might be some permissions issues where you have to enable CDNs. It's not kind of enabled out of the box. But let's just not worry about deployment for right now. You can either bring in a CDN, or as Jacob was saying, you can bring in Bootstrap as a dependency. And so if you go to npm JS, you can bring in Bootstrap as a dependency with an npm I bootstrap, and then you don't bring it in as a CDN. Okay, so if you want to bring in Bootstrap, there's a couple of approaches. One is kind of like the CDN way. Another one is just bringing it in as a dependency. It doesn't make a big difference. So let's just do this. Let's just bring it in this way. npm I bootstrap. Let's close. Control C to get back to the terminal. npm I bootstrap. Now you're going to notice this is under node modules. And if I scroll down, we have Bootstrap. And then I've got dist, CSS, and here's my Bootstrap files, Bootstrap CSS. So traversing that is always fun. Import. And I believe we're going to say bootstrap /dist. Let's see if that path looks good. Bootstrap. So we're inside node modules. We go bootstrap /dist /css bootstrap.min.css. Now our Bootstrap class of text primary, if done, we need to boot it back up, which is done with npm run dev. Now it brings in Bootstrap. Yeah. Now, with that being the case, of course, there's two things that you need to bring in with Bootstrap. You need to bring in the CSS, which gets the colors to work. But if you want the carousel to work, if you want the nav bar to work, you have to bring in the Bootstrap JavaScript as well. So here inside of the JS folder, we get the bootstrap min.js. So let's bring in import the JavaScript as well. And with that, we can do a test on the, like a nav bar. So the way to test the nav bar is to go to the docs and then just grab a nav bar off the docs.
And that one works without the .js.
But the little hamburger menu where it pops out,
And I've got a drop down thing.
yeah, so when the nav bar breaks is when you kind of go a mobile view with it. If I can grab the mobile view. Okay, to get this little scrolling feature, if you don't have the JavaScript, that's not going to work. Okay, so if I grab this, what I call the kitchen sink nav bar, okay, and I'm just going to plop in my nav bar up at the top. Okay, another learning thing here, right? What did I just say about classes? The word class is not correct in your JSX, right? All that word, every time it says class, it needs to be replaced with class name. So if you're copying and pasting from a Bootstrap doc, you're gonna have to update all of those classes into a class name. Now that can be done with a Control F, find and replace the word class with class name. And you can do it one by one, or you can replace all. It does work, except for this one's going to be now, line 50 is going to be class name. Watch, I'm going to hit replace all, and line 50 is class name. So I'm obviously not doing that, I'm fixing that.
You can select everything that you wanted to find. Like, say you don't want to use the entire document, but there's a section you want to do. If you highlight it all, you could do your class, replace class name.
Now it's still not happy about a few other things.
More than likely, it's about the bootstrap bundle import.
So, yeah, so let's bootstrap.bundle. That doesn't look right, does it? So let's go back up to Bootstrap. Bootstrap, no, that looks right. Let's just do bootstrap.min.js. That's what we want. We want bootstrap.min.js.
What's the difference between min and CSS?
Less spaces.
Well, a minimized is, yeah, getting rid of all the white space. So it's really making a file size as small as possible. Now it's still not happy at me because it looks like my divider, line 35. Let me go to line 35, drop down divider, we've got a little, okay. So here, the HR, all tags need to be self-closing. So if you put a / on that HR, okay, save that. There's probably another one.
There's an input.
Line 44, if I go down to line 44, your input tags need to be self-closing. So I'm going to find line 44, save that. Okay.
There's an HTML to JSX extension. You just highlight what you want to convert and hit right-click it, and it will.
Jacob is the master of extensions.
Yeah, it replaces all of the class names and it fixes that, like the closing slashes and all that.
So if you want to do less of this manual work, there's an extension to help you with converting your HTML into JSX.
Oh, there it is.
Just be careful with it. If you select like something that's already converted, it can cause some issues.
Here's our Bootstrap nav bar, and by the way, this is working. Otherwise, this dropdown wouldn't work either in the event that you didn't have the JavaScript enabled. And there's our nav bar. Okay. So that's probably the best way to bring in Bootstrap. You bring it in at the parent app JSX, and therefore it's available at on all the children as well. Right? App is the parent of all the other components. Okay, so now that we have Bootstrap brought in, we don't really need this nav bar, so let's go ahead and delete it. And we don't need this username hook, so let's go ahead and delete that. So we got an empty page. Back to the lab. So inside of cart, we're going to have a cart list. And so let's go ahead and make our first component, which is a cart list. And that's going to be inside of source. So inside of source, we'll make a cart list .jsx. Export default function cart list and doesn't want the semicolon there. Inside of here, we're going to return a fragmented cart list. Except for this doesn't say cart list, it says shopping cart, right? And I'll do a little Bootstrap container here. Div class name of container. Then we'll get a kind of a wrapper going around everything. So app is going to call cart lists, and then cart list is going to call cart list items. Up here in app, let's do as we did before. Let's import cart lists from cart list, and let's bring in cart list. Now, one rule of JSX is built on top of XML. And one rule in XML is that every opening tag has to have a closing tag. That's why I wasn't happy with my HR and I wasn't happy with my input tag, because those tags in HTML, they're optional. Like you can optionally have a / or not. But in XML, it's not optional. Every opening tag has to have a closing tag. And so that's a rule of JSX. Every opening tag has to have a closing tag. Therefore, you cannot have cart list like this. Cart list is an opening tag. It either has to be self-closing or followed with a cart list, but but there's really no point of doing that tag. You just do the self-closing feature there. And if I go here, we get shopping cart. We have our first component. I'm going to delete my app. I don't want to use my app CSS. That's some CSS that someone else wrote. Don't really care for that. Okay. So now we're getting somewhere. It's still not where I want to be. Let's see what other CSS is going on here. Let me go to, there's an index CSS. A lot going on here with my index CSS. I bet you my, oops. Close. Let me inspect this, see where this is all coming from. Okay, main JSX. Main JSX. There it is. Import index.css. Right? This index.css, I don't want any of that. I'm going to delete that as well. So I had to delete a couple of CSS imports that I didn't want. Now my shopping cart's kind of up at the top, which is what I want. And all I have is this container, which is my wrapper, which is, notice we coded class name, but it gets sent down to the client as div class of container, right? Class name isn't sent down to the client because that's JSX, not understood by the browser.
What other CSS do we need to delete besides that one on main? Is that the only one I was active?
I deleted one CSS here, and I think there was a CSS on app JSX. I think it was called app CSS. I deleted that one in there. Okay, so now let's start up on our form, and we can kind of refactor this as we go. Our form has a bunch of buttons on it. Looks like an add item button, and some buttons over here to increase quantity and decrease quantity. So I'm actually going to start my cart list with my items inside here. So let's bring in useState, import useState from React. And notice above the return statement is where I'm going to create my hook. I'm going to say here I'm going to have an array of items, and to modify the items, again these are immutable, we're going to use the mutator method called setItems equals useState. Now notice I've got an array here. Item 1 is an object. I'm going to use NanoID to generate a GUID. The default name is hat, and the quantity is 2. Hat 2, default state. Okay, I'm going to save that. Now I need to install NanoID, so I'm going to Control-C it here. I'm going to pause and let you guys code that. So Drew had a good question. He's like, hey, at this point, what's really app doing for us? Like if you look inside of main calls app, and if you go inside of app calls cart list. Can't you just get rid of app? And yeah, you could. I would say there's a little bit of a convention that I've seen that the root container or the root, not container, the root component is typically app. You know, you might have more than just your cart lists kind of moving forward. You know, your app might have cart list and some other things, right? As the component gets more complex. So in its current version, yeah, you could just get rid of cart list, but presumably this interface would become more complex and you would have more components inside of app. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah, Nathan? All right. Just to kind of glance at the site right now, there's nothing coming up. We've got some errors because it doesn't know what Nano ID is. If you go to the console, you could see that we're crashing because Nano ID is not defined. So we need to close this down, npm install Nano ID. And now we can use this Nano ID function if we import it. So the import for Nano ID, it looks like this. Import Nano ID from Nano ID. Now here we have an array of items. We don't know how many items are going to be in here, right? We don't know how many items are in our array. So what you do in React, when you have an array of things and you want to display those things on the page, you know, it's not as simple as before when we had a string. We just put the string inside of like, you just can't do that. Although I've never tried. Not pretty sure that's not going to work.
You also don't have it running.
I don't have it running, so let's get it up and running. Let's click enter there, right? And that doesn't work, right? To get that, it's like, hey, objects are not valid as a React child. You just can't put an array inside of curlies and have it print out. What we can use though is the array.map. If we go back into the JavaScript world, MDN, array map. You guys might remember, we say, hey, we have an array, and we can say array1.map, and then each element, we return that element times 2. So 1 becomes 2, 4 becomes 8, 9, 18, 16, 32, and that's your output. So here we're gonna do something similar, and we're gonna call items.map, and then for each item we're gonna write a little JSX. So let's kind of do that. We're gonna say items.map for each item. Now you're seeing here, it's suggesting something. I think we need a root. So let's just do a paragraph. Let's just try and do something real simple. And we're going to say item.name inside of curlies. So each item, return item.name. This is not happy with me, so hold on. It's basically what I had. Whoop. It's the same error as before. Let me get my syntax down here. Oh, I know what it is. I'm missing my curlies on the outside. So here's my problem. Items.map, that's JavaScript. And here, when I'm writing HTML, it assumes HTML unless it encounters the curly. When you encounter the curly, this is where you write your JavaScript. I was trying a JavaScript function in a place I couldn't write it. So now that I've got some curlies, I can call items.map. And I can say for each item, put that inside of a paragraph. Item.name. I don't think I need these items.name. And
Change item to items.
I did. Thank you.
No, the other one.
Item. Good eye.
The one before the arrow.
The map.
This is items.map for each item. Now, I don't think I need these parentheses. I do need a parenthesis here. Pause. Okay, the current error that I'm getting, it says it's missing a key, which this helps that Shadow DOM know if you're updating a particular item, which item to update. So each item has to have a key, and so that's the reason for the ID. So here, p key equals, 1 second, Connor. Curly's item.id. Okay, that's what I was missing. So we're mapping our items. For each item, we have one root here. Where this gets complicated is if you need a parent, but for each item, we're just going to put the item's name inside of a paragraph, and then the key is the item ID, which is generated from there. Okay, now we're closer, and all we got to do is put item.name inside of curly's right here, because that's a little bit of JavaScript. And now we see the word hat. If we refresh, we've got no errors. Okay. Apologize for the syntax mistakes, but now they are cleaned up. If I have a second item, let's say a tie and a belt, 2 and 1, right? So ID, nano ID, name is tie, quantity is 2. Last but not least is belt. quantity is 1. Now, let's say for the sake of this, for our items, we have a paragraph with the item name. And let's say we wanted another paragraph with the, or maybe we just, yeah, we'll do another paragraph with the item dot quantity. And you're going to see here it says, hey, you must have one parent element. And so this is essentially what we have. For each item, we want a paragraph okay, and you need one parent element here. And so maybe we do wrap these in a div. We're going to put that key on the div. And inside the div, we're going to have 2 paragraphs. Hat 2, tie 2, belt 1. Okay, again, clear. What I always do is I clear out the console and refresh just to make sure I've fixed up all the errors. Okay, now we're going to be refactoring this. This is just a step in the process, so yeah. Okay, so a couple things, you know, you don't touch React every day, and so it kind of, the syntax evades you a little bit, but a couple things that we did here that are worth re-mentioning. When you have a map function, if that map function for every item, you just need to do, if you have a root element, like a paragraph, then that's all you need. You need a root. But since I wanted 2 paragraphs, and these 2 paragraphs are siblings, I needed a parent, right? So I made this div. Okay, so if you just have one element on your map, then that element needs to have a unique ID, right? Which this unique ID, if you leave this out, check this out, right? If I leave the key off, do you guys get that error message where it says missing key? And that looks like that's coming from my ESLint, that's coming from my linter. Okay, now if I save that, I don't include a key, and I refresh, you get this warning. Each child in a list should have a unique key prop. Okay, so it doesn't really matter that your linter is telling you this or not, because the console will tell you that in a warning. Now it still works, okay? But the reason you need a key is that Shadow DOM needs to know, hey, if I update the ties quantity, it needs to know what item in the array to update. Okay, so that key is actually used by that Shadow DOM behind the scenes, and that has to go on the parent. So that's why we say key equals JavaScript land item.id. And now if I go back and I clear out my console and I refresh, now I don't get that warning. And if I go into my HTML and kind of take a look at what's rendered, it actually doesn't even show you that key. The key is actually not sent down to the client. I guess that's not important for the client to see, but it is important for that Shadow DOM to kind of work behind the scenes. Okay, so 2 things to remember. Thing number 1, a mapping needs a root element. And thing number 2, that root element needs a unique identifier. In which case we generated a nano ID. Now, you might say, Mr. G, why don't we just use the subscript? In other words, this would be sub 0, this would be sub 1, this would be sub 2 as the key. You would just say, okay, well, this is item 1, item 0, item 1, item 2. That's not a good practice because, well, as you add and subtract items, their position in the array changes, their subscript might change. Okay, so it's not a good idea to use the subscript as the key because that subscript, you know, it might change. Okay, that's why you use something like a GUID that is very unlikely to be duplicate. And you could use a tool such as NanoID. With that being the case, we're not going to just, you know, we're not just going to have each item thrown into a paragraph tag. If we go back to the mock-up, you know, what we're kind of shooting for here is something like this. And so maybe we put a text box. Maybe we just kind of start, you know, what goes inside here. Let's change this out. Again, kind of going back and forth here. Each one of these needs to be its own row. And so, I don't know, we could just start coding rows. So outside of my map, div class of row.
Doesn't have to be class name.
Class name. Maybe inside of each. Okay, I'm sure I'll refactor this a couple of times, but okay, now for each item we'll make a row. And a text box is going to take up a whole row. So I'm see a text box, like a span, and a couple of buttons. The span will hold the quantity, the text box will hold. So input type of text. Class name is Bootstrap form hyphen control, and we want it to take up call hyphen 4. We'll take up not the whole row, we'll take up 1/4 of the row, and this will be item dot name. The above error occurred in the input component. Do I not have a closing input? Oh, okay. So notice how my input, it wants it to be a closing tag as such. No, it doesn't.
It's because you were closing it.
Oh.
Right before item.name.
Oh, there it is. Okay. I was closing input early. Okay, hold on. I know what I'm doing. Okay, so, excuse me. So input should be self-closing. The value is item.name. Sorry about that.
You gotta refresh to get rid of the error sheet.
Okay, so we refresh. Now this is a text box. It's not doing the call thing that I want. If I inspect, I didn't think so. You could put a call wrapping that. I didn't think you could shorten it with call -4. So let's go to Get Bootstrap. I just want to show, if I go to the docs and the grid, div class of call, and then you put the control inside of it. And notice you have to say call hyphen class name. Did I do class name call? Let's do call -medium-4. Let's see. I'm just not sure that you can do it right on the control like that. I don't remember doing that. So the way you fix that is you extract that call -4 into a div class name call for here.
Should be.
You add an extra div. Now it just goes 1/4. If I clear out the console and refresh. Okay, now here's a warning. We have no way of changing our, like I could type in this text box all day, it's not letting me change. That's what this warning is saying. 3 times you're getting this warning, but we will fix that. Div class name, call -4, close the div, and this will be our span with a item dot quantity. And another div class name call for with 2 buttons, remove button, which will say minus, pretty ugly, and a button of success with the plus. It's ugly, but we're getting somewhere. Remember rounded corners in Bootstrap? Maybe a rounded pill. So we can add the class of rounded -pill. Maybe get it looking like a little bit. Rounded corners. Rounded pill to make badges. Huh?
On borders, you have to add class and scroll on.
Yeah, borders will do it.
Borders, yeah, border. So if we scroll down on borders, we can start rounding the radius. 75, 75. Looks like rounded circle. Class name of rounded circle. Class name rounded circle. Get it looking like what we want it to. Okay. Still not exactly what I want. But we're getting there. That's way too much space for a label, so I'm just going to take this middle column down to like call hyphen, I don't know, call 1. Okay, that's better. And maybe I want some margin between these buttons. So I'll say margin at the end -3, I don't know, something like that. Okay, another thing I want to do here, and I'm not sure where, but I want to put a console log. I'm going to say cart list component rendered. So I'm going to put a console log, cart list component rendered. And if I go to console, just to kind of see how many times this thing gets drawn. We get a console log here in dark text, and then another one in gray text, and then we get a warning. So essentially, I believe this just means it's just getting rendered once. But as we start making changes, I want to keep kind of an eye on these console logs. So this isn't really doing anything for us, just to kind of keep an eye. No problem. Now, the other thing that we need to start accounting for is this right here, which is the sum of our item quantities.
We could put a badge.
Put a badge. Yeah, we could do a little pill or a badge or something up in the head. And then the button that says add item. Now, I know how I did this in the past, which is the following, and I might try and update this code. So I made a let item count equals, we started off at 0, little for loop, for of, so if I go for of loop and then hit tab to bring in const item of items, we're going to say if there's an item is truthy and the item has a quantity is truthy. If there's an item and the item has a quantity, then we're going to increase item count by the item's quantity. Now I have this variable of item count that allows me to, maybe in a badge of some sort, let's go up here and find a pill, right? So let's find a pill badges, something like a primary, span, class name of badge.
We can do it as a rounded circle, probably.
Rounded circle. So right now here, span, class name of badge, rounded circle, and then a primary color, text BG primary. And this will be item count is our variable that we just made. we get the little number 5 there. Clear that out.
We might want to add another div around those two.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to get that up next to the shopping cart, this is a heading, which of course takes up the full H1. You could make that a span, and then there's a Bootstrap class for text to make it a heading. So here's text, and font size, FS1 text. So here we can go up into our H1, make that a span, so it doesn't cause a line break, end the span, and do a class name, and that was FS-1, font size 1, text primary. There we go. Shopping cart, we get our little badge, and then we could say margin at the end 4, push it over. And then on this one, let's just do the FS1 here. Whoa, a little bit big, FS3, something like that. And then let's do margin at the bottom, just to push that down a little bit. So that's where I've landed right now. Okay, now where we're headed is we need to be able to update, for example, the text or the quantity. And we update the text by changing the text box, and we update the quantity by clicking the plus or minus button. But keep in mind, these items are immutable, and so we have to write array methods that kind of create copies and then use those copies. So the syntax for doing that is, you know, is a little bit different. And so, when we change a value on the text box, let's call a function. And so we're going to write a little function here called, keep in mind this is inside of an items map. And so let's on change. We're going to call a JavaScript function here. Now this functions can be declared outside of the return. So here's the return. We can declare a function on name change. And I'm just going to hold off on this. Okay, on change we need to call. So I made this function on name change, and here we're going to pass on name change. Okay. So anytime we go to change, now it's not changing anything yet, but you can see every time I'm clicking the button, it's calling my function. Now this function on name change, as I started, let's take a look at some of these suggestions on name change. We're going to write a function to handle name change in the array of items. So we're going to accept the event object. The event object has the text box in it, right? The text box with the value. And we will pass the item in as well. Okay, so let's talk about what we're doing here. We pass in the event object, which has the text box. The text box has a value, and we pass in the item that we're going to change. We start with a new array, which is equal to a copy of the old array. So this makes a copy of the old array. We then get the index of the item in the array. We then update the name property in our new copy to be the value of the text box. And then we call set items, passing the new items in. So set items is the mutator passing the copy of the new. I've seen a lot of different syntaxes for doing this. This is why I was trying to get this thing to suggest the right, a syntax that I think was decent, right? I wasn't happy with the first couple ones, but this makes sense. Here's an array. We're spreading each one, updating the name, calling the mutator. And if I go back, that's interesting. It can compile. I got to scroll up to get my port that I'm on. Where is this running on the port? If it's not, I'm going to Control C to close it and rerun it. Okay, so cannot set properties of undefined setting name. So it is crashing on line 25. So new items sub index probably doesn't like items index of items. Let's console log index. Let's make sure it's getting a number. Clear that out. Okay, it's not getting a number. This -1 index items index of one second. So line 24 is my problem. Okay. After looking at this, I realized that on name change, I didn't pass the arguments Uh, okay, so when you pass arguments, we do this. EVT arrow on name change, EVT comma item. So we made this function, but we didn't call that function correctly. So we had to pass to that function, we had to pass the event and the item. Now that index of item is being passed correctly, hopefully this line works for us. So let's take another look. So I made the function, I just didn't call the function correctly. Let's see what breaks now. Clear this out, refresh. Okay. Now I can change the text.
Unselects the text box every time. Go back and undo your
Okay. So my mistake was a simple one, is that I was not calling the function correctly. So there's the code to change the name. Okay, we got 20 minutes or so left in class, and so I just want to finish it up. And then there's a little bit more to do tomorrow, but I just want to get this at least at a bare bones, changing names, which we now have.
It was because it's in the functions, because every time it updated the array, it remapped everything.
Right. Okay. So we can change the names. Let's change the quantity as well. So we got our buttons. Let's go ahead and click on the buttons. JavaScript land, event object, arrow function. We'll call a function called on add quantity. EVT item. Very similar to what we did before. Now we'll make a function on add quantity, EVT item. We don't need the console logs in here anymore, but it just ripped off my last code, made a copy of the array, got the index of the item that you passed in, increased the quantity by 1, and then set the items. In this case, you can notice that the EVT object is never used. Let's see if we can increase the quantity, and it is increasing our total for 17. But you're gonna notice every time I'm changing a state on any one of these, it's redrawing the whole thing, the component, which is why it's kind of updating this quantity here. Because this code's going to run every time it re-renders this component. It's rerunning this loop and summing up our item count. And of course, if you can add a quantity, of course you can subtract a quantity. Oh, did I do that on the, look at that. Look at me go. I need to take that function. Is that what you said, Connor?
Yep.
I'm like, why didn't you listen to me? Put that on the plus. And then on click JavaScript land, EVT, arrow function on really we learned we don't need the event object on these. You can refactor that to just pass the item in which case you can call it like this. So let's go ahead and make that function. There's some different ways of doing this. Yes.
When you do like has like an operation parameter and then check it to the plus or at minus it's something like that too.
So one suggestion is a good one, right? Send a string in for what operation are you performing, and then based on that string, you actually increment or decrement the quantity, so you don't have to actually write two different functions. And that's totally, we can do that. So let's clean it up. Okay, what do I got going on here? Too many re-renders, I've got something broken.
On the button clicks, if you pass in stuff, you have to do a.
You have to do it that way?
You have to, yeah, that. No, I don't think you have to use the event, but you just need that on the button click.
Oh, you need to do that.
Parentheses, yeah.
There you go, empty parentheses. There we go. Okay, so when you pass something into a function, you at least have to have anonymous arrow function like that. Okay, now they can go up, they can go down, down, up. Let me zoom out, pause here. So let's, next, we'll just have this add item button that we're clearly missing at the moment. Here's our shopping cart. Maybe we put in a little line break. Button type of button. Class name. Button primary. This will say, what does it need to say? Add item. If I would just keep this thing in the browser, I wouldn't have to, if I wouldn't close it, but that's not my habit. My habit is to close it. So now we got a nice blue add item button. And when we click add item, JavaScript land, arrow. We can just call set items. Spread items. And add a new object with an ID. A name that is an empty string. A quantity that is 1. So again, we're not we're not modifying items, we're spreading them out individually, so pulling each object out, putting it in a new array, which is dictated by those brackets, and then adding an empty object at the end. So if we take a look, we now have a sock, and we can increase and decrease accordingly. Okay, if this goes down to 0, then, well, there's a few things to keep working on here. Like, for example, if this goes down to 0, I would want it to remove sock. Right? So that's part of the lab. And then once all items are gone, a little message saying, hey, you've got no items in your cart, please add an item, or something like that. There's a few things to work on here, but I just want to get everyone to this point today, which is a really good point to then start tomorrow. Okay, so I'll stop this cart here and I'll come around and get everyone caught up.